Welcome to Lutherans Alive. This is the program that seeks to tell the stories of Lutheran Christians and their ministries here in southwestern Pennsylvania, believing that God is doing wonderful things through us. I'm Pastor Tony Schneck, and as we welcome to the program today Marta Spangler, Marta continues to serve as a representative of the Gettysburg Seminary here in the territory of our Synod. And she's been on the program before to speak about the Crossroads campaign and her work here together with our Synod. But today, Marta is going to reflect on her on another experience that she had a while back as a youth in global mission. Marta, say a few words, if you could please, about what it was like, or how did you get to be a young adult in global mission through our ELCA? What was that all about?
Well, I found out about the program as a young person from a former missionary in my congregation as something to think about and ponder about. And so when I was at the University of Pittsburgh in my last semester, I applied for this program, something that I had been praying about, and I knew that I wanted to do some kind of service the year after I graduated. And so I applied saying that I would go anywhere and that I wanted to serve. And so I went through the process of applying and interviewing, and it turns out that they sent me, and a few months after I graduated in the summer of 2008, I left the country and went to serve in the West Bank with the Jerusalem and West Bank Young Adult and Global Mission Program for the ELCA.
And you were there for how long?
I was there for almost a year. So we had training in August, and I returned at the end of the following July. So a full year.
And what exactly did you find yourself doing while you were there in the Holy Land? A young woman, Lutheran, being sent there. What did you do there?
Well, I served with the Lutheran school system. One of the things that the Lutheran community is known for is their education programs. And these are old German mission congregations, and they've been there for quite some time. And they're known in the community as some of the best schools to send your children to. So I had the opportunity of serving at the Lutheran school in Beit Zahur, which is outside of Bethlehem. It's the village that is known in the New Testament as being the home of the shepherds. Beit in Arabic meaning house or home, and Zahur meaning shepherds. So that's where the shepherds' fields are. So when baby Jesus was born, that's the town that's known for coming and visiting and then spreading the good news of Christ's birth.
Out in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night. Wonderful. And that's where you were, out in those fields. Or near them anyway, at least, somewhere out there. That's great. That's great. What is it like right now to be a Christian in the Holy Land out there, especially in that part of the Holy Land there in Bethlehem and Beit Zahur?
Well, it's actually a struggle. Really for the whole Palestinian community, and especially I think for the Christian community. There's sort of a different otherness about being Christian in the Holy Land. Part of this community is a historical Christian community. They've been around for a lot longer than we realize, some of the original followers of Christ. And so these communities are actually alienated in some ways from their own culture, which is now predominantly Muslim, because these are Palestinians and Arab Christians. But in some ways they have connections to the West because they are our brothers and sisters in Christ. And so that community has dwindled in size. Living under Israeli occupation in the West Bank has made jobs scarce, it's made opportunities for learning scarce. And so those who are of means have left, and a lot of the Christian population there that was middle class has left the country, in part because they have connections outside of the West Bank that allow them to travel in ways that their neighbors cannot. So what's left is basically 2% of the population of the West Bank is now Christian. And so in Bethlehem, where I was in the Bethlehem district, which used to be predominantly Christian, is now only 30% of their population is Christian. Beit Sahor, the village where I was working and serving, is still predominantly Christian, and the school is predominantly Christian. But what happens is there's difficulties within the community because of the opportunities awarded Christians as opposed to the Muslims, opportunities to travel to Israel, opportunities and freedoms that are not allowed other Arab Palestinians. And so that creates difficulties and rifts within their local communities. And unfortunately, I think that the role of Christians in the Holy Land is so vitally important for justice and peace to happen. The message of peace that Jesus Christ brings is something that I see as being so essential in the land of the three Abrahamic faiths to remain there. And so our role as Lutherans in supporting and advocating for that community is huge and well known, and is certainly evidenced in the relationships we've built there.
And the Lutherans who are there, specifically the Lutheran Christians, we have some partnering relationships with other Christians who are there as well?
Absolutely. They all work together. I think that they don't make the same distinctions in denominations that we do here in the U.S. They see their Christian brothers in ecumenical work as really vital to the life of their communities. And so in many ways, while their Christian identity is very important in what they practice, be they Orthodox, be they Roman Catholic, be they Protestant, like the Lutheran community, and each of them has their own specific ministries. They do work very closely together to work for peace and justice for the people there.
I would think, too, that the specific circumstances of in which the Christians find themselves there in the Holy Land, the many uncertainties, even dangers there, can help the communities pull together and work together in any way that's needful.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I found when I was there too that people have really tragic stories in their past, in their recent past. 10 years ago when the Second Intifada came to the Holy Land, Intifada usually is translated as uprising, but the Arabic actually means a shaking off. And so there's this history of feeling as though they are oppressed, they cannot control their own destiny. And that kind of fatalism, of course, breeds violence in the community. And although there hasn't been any severe Palestinian violence directed at Israel since the building of the wall, it certainly affects everyday life for people. And I think that coming in as an outsider, even as a tourist, you become an audience for the local people to tell you their story. And I found while I was there that my first time that I would meet with a family, I needed to hear the stories about what had happened, who other family members had passed away, been shot, jailed, and who they had lost because of the conflict there. And it was only after you learn those things that you can really begin a relationship, because as an outsider, otherwise you wouldn't understand. I did notice, though, as the course of the year went on, that after Christmas that year, in January and end of December 2008 and January 2009, was the Gaza incursion. And so there was ground fighting as Israel passed through the Gaza blockade, and there were actual fighting and violent killing taking place, and it was on the news, and it was in newspapers, television, and so children were seeing this and asking questions. And I had a young girl in the kindergarten approach me, and she said, "Why are they killing children in Gaza?" And there's no answer you can give to a child that satisfies that question. And so I noticed that after I had gone through that experience and been there during that time with them, that people no longer told me their stories. And I realized it was because you don't complain to other people under occupation about the occupation. And so in a way, I had lived in solidarity with them through that time. And so I was no longer someone that they could complain to. And so it was a really interesting transition in my year and my time of being there, that all of a sudden I was one of them. But I do think that, even in the moments where it's not blatant violence, that there's conflict in the fact that there's a wall being built between two communities, and there's conflict in the fact that there are over 600 different blockades within the Palestinian territories as counted by the UN. And they exist every day as barriers for people to travel freely to work from one community to another to visit people.
Certainly a place that presents many, many challenges for those who live and work there and those who worship there. More about all of those things with Marta Spangler after we take a short break here on Lutherans Alive. Welcome back to Lutherans Alive. We continue our conversation with Marta Spangler. Marta served as a young adult in global mission in the Holy Land, specifically the West Bank. A challenging place to be in many ways. We were talking a little bit in our first segment about the wall and just how the tensions in that part of the world affect the everyday life of the people who live there. Could you say some more about that, Marta, about what's it like to live there?
Sure, and I'll also say for congregations that are thinking about making trips there, there are some great resources for them to look at before they go. Namely Peace Not Walls, which is an ELCA initiative that has great context and information and background about what's going on there. As far as daily life and what that means for people who have to cross the wall or the barrier, as it is called, depending on which side you talk to. People start lining up at 3 or 4 in the morning if they want to go across to the Jerusalem side in order to be a day laborer. And then they return usually around 5 or 6. And it can take anywhere from an hour and a half to get from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. It can take as long as 4 hours. You may not get there. All of those are real possibilities for people who are dealing with that every day. And the wall itself is constructed in such a way that it often will include a Jewish community, or what we hear on the news as settlements outside of the Jerusalem area, ruled illegal by the UN, and we've signed on to the Geneva Convention saying that all settlement building is illegal, and this is something the U.S. does advocate. It's been in the news recently, and we'll see if we continue to do that. But as of right now, each of these settlements is ruled illegal, and the wall cuts into the Palestinian territories, oftentimes cutting off local Palestinians from their land. If they're agricultural, it's an agriculturally based society, and many of them grow olive trees as sort of the foundation of their economy and of their livelihood. Many of their trees have been cut down in rural areas in order to accommodate the wall coming through. And it's taken land, it's cut families apart. You hear stories of folks who have family on both sides that they can no longer visit. It's a real tragedy, and it is in many ways ripping apart the fabric of the community, economically for people to work, but also in relationship with one another.
Absolutely, a very, very politically charged conflict. You know, there, and as is the case in many political conflicts, the lives of everyday people are affected, and sometimes that gets lost in all of the other conflicts that take place. How did you find life at the school where you worked for the children with whom you worked? What were your specific responsibilities there? What did you do, and how was it for those children who were students there?
I had a really wonderful placement at my school. So I would wake up every morning in my apartment, and I got a ride from the principal on his way to school. And so I would show up, and every morning began with a devotion at the school, usually led by students. And so each class would take a different day of the week and present things to worship, things to raise up, poetry that they'd written, writings, plays, music, as an offering to begin the day. I was assisting in the English classes. I didn't, and one of the important things about the YAGM is that the Young Adults in Global Mission, is that we didn't want to take positions at the school that would be paid positions, but rather to supplement and be used where needed. Because there is such a huge unemployment rate in the community, it would not be wise to take a position that could offer someone a living. So instead, I would assist in the English classes, especially with writing. As a native English speaker and writer, my writing, of course, comes much more easily to me, and was a way that I could assist the teachers and help the students express themselves. But then I also took a conversational English class of some of the 11th graders. So in the mornings, after I was in the high school English class, I had 9 11th grade students who had transferred into the school. Because it was an old German mission school, all their classmates were taking German, but this wasn't common in the public school system, so several of them did not have the German background to join their fellow students. So we had a conversational English class which involved poetry and videos and talking and playing games and using their English in ways that were more creative than what they got to do in the classrooms. And this group also evolved by the end of the year to putting together the school's yearbook, which they hadn't had in 5 years. So we were able to put together pictures, write about events that took place over the year, and things that were important to them that they wanted to raise up as to what was going on in their school. So that was a really fun group of students that I got to know really, really well, and was really impressed by the depth of their writing and the depth of what they were willing to share with me as an outsider and as a teacher, as far as their own experiences and their own dreams for what they wanted to do. So I really enjoyed being able to do that. And then when I had free time, when I wasn't in the English classrooms, I spent time with the kindergarten classes. And this was one of the ways that I really was able to improve my own language skills, because kindergartners don't speak any English, so I was forced to use my Arabic and learn my numbers and my colors and my letters along with all of the kindergarten students. So that was a lot of fun to be able to just play with students. There aren't enough teachers, I think, in their kindergarten classrooms, so being able to get attention from a teacher was really a wonderful thing for these children. And one thing I did notice about the ways in which the students especially were affected by what was going on was the level of violence in the classroom between children. And I think part of that, I mean, physically fighting, and I think part of that is what they're accustomed to seeing all the time and what they internalize. But also the sense that their school system is just so different from ours. And I think culturally as well, because of what's been going on with all of the tension, there's a very fatalistic attitude that there's no reason to correct a child or to encourage a child to dream about something, especially with my older students. And part of this is a very American reality, that if you work as hard as you possibly can, you can do anything. And that's not necessarily the case for a student who may not be able to afford or travel to go to school and have all those opportunities. So being able to engage students with what was realistically possible and to encourage them to dream within that was really an amazing experience to have them realize. And so I found it to be really, and to show them love and affection and care and respect that they so need and deserve.
Mm-hmm. And it must have been difficult to leave. As you said, after a certain amount of time, you began to be treated like a member of the community, one of them, so to speak. So was it hard to leave?
It was very difficult to leave.
Yeah.
Amidst all the tension, there's an incredible amount of hospitality for people who are coming. And I think that I've learned a lot from that sense of hospitality and how important it is to welcome someone and to celebrate moments in life when everything else around you seems to be falling apart. And I was amazed constantly at the feasts that would be prepared for an afternoon where I would come visit. It was really, it was heartwarming, and in some ways, I was adopted as a member of the family. They saw me as someone who didn't have any parents or, family members, and so people would try and take on that role. So when it came time to leave, it was really difficult to say goodbye. And I actually had made a promise to one of my roommates to travel back within the year, and we did do that. So this past summer, I got the chance to visit all of my 11th grade students who had graduated, and to celebrate with them as they were receiving their state exams. All of them passed their English, which I was really, really pleased to hear, and able to celebrate with them and to visit them again was really nice.
More with Marta Spangler and her time in the Holy Land and life there after another break here on Lutherans Alive. Welcome back again to Lutherans Alive. We're learning a lot about life in the Holy Land from Marta Spangler, who spent a little less than a year there as a young adult in global mission through our Lutheran Church. And we were talking a little bit in our last segment about Middle Eastern culture and the hospitality. It reminds me of some of the biblical stories that we have of Abraham welcoming strangers, the three strangers, and just in general that table fellowship that Jesus had with people, and so many stories about welcoming the stranger and how important hospitality is. The wedding at Cana, all of those stories, and it sounds as if you were made very welcome. But were there cultural differences in terms of the fact that you're a woman there traveling, an American woman traveling in the Middle East? What was it like to be a woman traveling in the Middle East there? There's some cultural differences.
Absolutely. It's night and day different from what you would expect in a city here and in American culture. It certainly was an adjustment for me. As a young woman who's used to being independent and going out and being able to do what I want to do, it was difficult and sometimes frustrating. And even with the hospitality that is there when you're visiting a family, when you're out on the streets and you're presented as someone who does not have their head covered and who's blonde, and I stand out in a crowd, I certainly attracted attention. Oftentimes people asked me if I needed to cover my head, but really head covering, or the traditional hijab worn by the Muslim woman, is an identity scarf, and so I would never want to put on something like that because I don't identify as a Muslim woman, and Christian women there don't cover their heads either. But rather, as a young American woman, I attracted a lot of attention just because I stand out. And also because the media that they see about young American women in the movies and the TV shows, if you think of what the behavior of a young woman in your typical teenage romantic comedy is like, then you have a very skewed picture of what actual usual interactions are between American people. And so part of our presence there as young people is to show what young Christians are like, and that we wouldn't interact that way. And so it shows what a modern young person in America would be. And certainly it's also difficult because you're constantly measuring your interactions you have with people with what they would do with a local person. And it will never really be the same, but you want to be treated as though you are from there and to get that same respect. And so when you're trying to walk those fine lines, it can be really difficult and very frustrating. But only a few times, I mean, a very small handful of times did I really feel as though I was being treated with severe disrespect, or that people were treating me in a way that I wanted to get out of there immediately. For the most part, people understood that Americans dress a little differently, although I dressed pretty conservatively while I was there, to be mindful of what they culturally expect people to do. But at the same time, I'm never really going to look like a local person. So I had to deal with that while I was there.
Sure, sure. Did you feel a lot of support from those back home? In this age, certainly their communication is wonderful now through the internet and being able to email. So why or Skype or anything like that, you were able to keep in touch with folks back home, and you felt the support?
I did, and I want the opportunity to say thank you. Southwestern Pennsylvania Synod supported me while I was there, and also the Global Mission Committee sent me letters and prayed for me while I was there. So I really did feel the prayers and support coming from Southwestern Pennsylvania, as well as my own home community in Gettysburg. And thankfully, with internet and the modern technologies of Skype, I was able to talk to my parents on a regular basis and stay connected at home, which I think that kind of connection is really important. And also, I have to say that in January, we received the Bishop's Academy trip. And so we also got the opportunity to meet with people in the church as they were traveling through. The Holy Land obviously attracts a lot of folks from the church traveling, and so when groups came from the U.S., we got the chance to greet them, and the bishop's trip especially was a very exciting time to be connected and be supported and prayed for while we were there.
Martha, thanks so much for sharing all that you've shared about your experience there in the Holy Land. I hope that our viewers have learned a lot about life in the Holy Land, and we hope that you'll continue to learn more. Welcome, and thanks for being here on Lutherans Alive. Thank you for being with us on Lutherans Alive today. And we know that from wherever you're watching, in your community, near your community, there's a group of Lutherans who would be very pleased to welcome you. We hope to see you in worship, and we hope to see you next time on Lutherans Alive.